Good morning, good afternoon, LinkedIn. Welcome to a first edition of Let's Build Touchpoints with Mattheus. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really fine. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in the Netherlands, and I'm really looking forward to this call with you, Chris.
Yes, it's been a few months in the making. I remember you starting to post about, signals and touch points, and it's been kind of a hot topic this year. I'm a big fan of Chris Walker, and while he's not talking about it as much at this point, um, he made a lot of good points about like what are signals and what are we going to do with all this data and how is it structured within the CRM specifically instead of relying on all these other third-party vendors to just tell us what is going on and then it doesn't match with the CRM. So it's super intriguing when you started talking about it. How did it start to come up for you, and why did you get interested in it?
Also Chris Walker, and I really like his latest episodes on building the revenue factory in the supply chain. And every department can be successful, yet if we have too much leads, or every part of the system can be successful, yet the whole factory can just fail, because everyone is looking at their own part. And I think judging signals is a really interesting way of looking at it, and a switch from the 2013 inbound methodology from HubSpot. You see a shift that it's not just a form submission with the white paper anymore. You have different signals that you can act on, but how do you implement that in your system, in your go-to-market machine? That's interesting. And I thought, well, let's build.
Yes, well said. Because it's most times the data is there somewhere, right? We're just not organizing it. We're not, you know, capturing it in maybe the exact way that would be insightful. So what you were doing with this object was super cool. So I thank you for coming on today. And I think to like reiterate the point of the revenue factory, like what is a signal? How does it relate? Like, it's the supply, right? It's the supply that might come in like throughout, lots of different points in the process. And when thinking about it, as soon as he started putting it in the way that like, okay, what happened that caused us to do something for us to use resources, sales resources usually, and shouldn't we want to know exactly what that is, right? Or else are we wasting a lot of money and effort on outbound activities that aren't based on anything, or we don't have a good idea? We put marketing through this ringer of, okay, we got to know exactly when everything is happening and what how are we assigning, revenue or impact or whichever way you do it. But then we get into sales and it's like, oh, we just care about if they close or not, like, and just hope. Like, so
Yeah,
is that what,
but
like, when you start building this out, like, what were you leaning on as far as like what you were trying to build actually?
yeah, I've prepared some screenshots, so I'll go into it. And what I want to say is that it looks very much like an attribution system, yet I that was not my reason. It's I don't believe in perfect attribution, but I do believe in having a sense of what's happening. Because what I see is that many companies, they are HubSpot data rich, yet insights poor. They have a lot of data, they don't know what's going on. And having that filter quickly, I think is really valuable in determining what's success, what's helping, what's impacting your business. Um, so that's what is where I started. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, no, I love that phrase. uh Data rich, insights poor. Probably applies to 95% of the HubSpot user base.
Yeah, and that's because, well, HubSpot isn't hard, yet there's so much features, and the complexity is in the um, how broad it is and how much you can do with it, the teams, and
Well, it makes
therefore
it
it's
so
really,
easy. It makes it
yeah,
so easy to get more, right? Everybody wants more
yeah,
data, right? We're creating more places to put data, and we're asking Zoom Info and Clay, and let's get more data. And we're not spending the time
exactly.
to like understand the data we have.
Exactly. And yeah, that's also why I started my own business as a fractional HubSpot and go-to-market partner, because I saw that, well, there's a disconnect between those data points. There's a disconnect between teams and their processes, and also a disconnect between um, what's your proposition, what's your messaging, and what's really the market demand. But we're now mostly talking about getting data right and having a correct overview. So, well, we already shortly discussed like the marketing shift from inbound to outbound. Um, this LinkedIn post was the exact reason why we got in touch. Um, Shout out to Chris, because I saw him make it, and I thought, well, I also want to make it. So 4 months ago, not too much time. Well, why a custom object? Because you have form submissions, you have campaigns, um, but the data is kind of missing, because you have a contact or a company overview, activity overview, but it's cluttered. You can filter, but there's so much going on. You sales, they have hardly the time to keep the CRM clean. They don't have time to really go through all of this. And if you have a company object, well, most form submissions or most forms, they only have contact data. They have contact properties. And even if you put a company property on a form, then it will only show the company property on this form, on the company activity overview. But also, it doesn't show who exactly did this form submission. And I think HubSpot is mainly B2B. You have a decision making unit, multiple people. You want to know what's up. And it's very much contact focused. While we see account based marketing, it's more on the whole account. So we want to have this insight on a company level. What I also saw is that you have multiple data points. So you can have a form submission, a pop-up form. Well, it's legacy now, but a LinkedIn lead gen form, a CTA button, and that can all mean that that's one like content offer, but that's scattered. So you want to have one data point instead of multiple totals. Um, yeah, and this is so strange to me. You cannot report on form submission dates. So in a form, you can see the exact submission date and timestamp, but you cannot report on this. So the mistake beginners make is they make a report on people that submitted a form, and on the x-axis they put the create date. Yet that's often the case for new contacts that today they were created and today they had the form submission. Yet if the contact was already 1 year, 2 years in your CRM, then that data is 1 or 2 years ago. So you want to report on this day. As a solution, you can make a date stamp. So what you do is, if this happens, you make a workflow and that stamps the day of today. You can also export, if you have all the form submissions, you can export the submission date, change it, and then import it back into HubSpot on the date stamp property. So you have historic data, but if you have a date stamp, then that's only on the latest touch point. So I've seen portals where people request multiple demos or like quote requests, and you would only see the latest one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to have all those touch points, but on the other hand, you there's a lot of portals with 100 plus forms. You don't want to make a date stamp property for every form. Um, yeah, and you do want to know what's the total amount of engagement, what is the source of the engagement, because we have latest source, we have original source, but there's also something in between, and there's a different reason why people come into your CRM, why they were created, why they requested the demo, and why or how they got to a deal. So saving that source on a custom object, I think, is really valuable. And also choose to do this for only for like high level sales signals. So you can make this on like any email or whatever, but for that case, I would say use the outbound timeline, which shows you all the emails, notes, meetings, whatever. And for the more important high level um, conversions, so to say, or signals, well, apply this custom object.
Yeah. And like one of my favorite examples, and this is the kind of stuff that causes like major disconnect and misalignment between marketing and sales, especially when there's too much focus on attribution and who's getting credit for what. Like that example you shared where somebody has been in the database for a year or two, and we're relying on this contact create, mechanism. But then, and maybe over that course of 1 to 2 years, they have become a champion of sorts, and they understand your value. They've consumed a lot of content. A lot of stuff has happened with them. But the actual trigger mechanism is they change jobs and they've got a different email address. And the 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 signal that we're talking about and the reason we need to separate it out somehow, but also keep it in the context of the database whenever possible. It's like every salesperson that I've talked to knows the value of keeping track of job changes, right? But we almost never see that information make it back into the CRM. Like, this is why I reached out. They changed jobs, right? And because of that,
Yeah,
now
and
we've brought them back in and we're going to have, uh, you know, sometimes the quickest sales process ever, right? And we lose a lot of that information.
and that's a big opportunity on two sides. So the first opportunity is you could lose your champion if they switch companies. So you could lose the current client, but if they are a fan of you, then you could easily win the next company that they work for. So yeah, I think that's an interesting signal to play on.
Yeah,
Um,
and like
yeah,
to that point, so what are we trying to accomplish here? It's we're trying to help. One, sometimes not everybody on the team understands how important that signal can be. So now we can report on it, much more effectively. Um, and two, we can actually understand how much of the business it can help. And maybe we start to invest in more resources to do specific outreach campaigns targeted at those lists specifically. We make sure everybody's on the same page as far as what the data needs to look like to say, okay, they changed jobs, but they went to a completely different industry. So maybe we're not going to target them, but just starting to understand all the nuance to say, okay, this is what our database looks like, but this is what's happening out here. There's definitely things happening out here that we want our salespeople to be aware of and take action on when it does.
Yeah, and for instance, people with a hand raiser requesting a demo, of course, it's obvious for sales to connect, but you see also a lot of sales action in the like the more awareness phase. For instance, like a trend report, yet that's sometimes way too early and not really the right signal, so to speak. And now having this data, you are able to see a report on, okay, we reached out. What was the um, conversion on it? So um, the job switch might have a higher conversion than following up on trend reports. And that
Yeah.
helps to
And without
allocate
this,
your resources.
yeah. And without this object that we're talking about here, without this data container, this separate, like, we're managing this data in a different way so that we can compare it to contact company deals, all these other things. And without that, you are forced to rely on, like, what I've seen, either the native, you try to manipulate the native properties, the out of the box properties, in ways that they're not meant to do. So you get in trouble pretty quickly if you try to do that, or you lose the insights, or you're relying on these really elaborate notes or properties, which are supposed to have everything that's happened in them. And maybe you built that out with one champion salesperson and they're really good at doing that. But then getting four other people to do that as well, usually not. It's very hard to make that work with any kind of consistency. And once you lose the consistency, you start to lose the value of the data, right? So really creating this
Yeah,
data container is so important.
yeah, definitely. But it has so many use cases. What I also like is for sales, it's really simple and account-based marketing. There's like a champion or an influencer, maybe on an operational level, and they download something and seeing someone from management then requesting an audit, and then later on seeing um, C-level joining an event. I think that representation or visual on activity on the DMU is non-existent, yeah, which is a big opportunity, I think. Um, I think 2 months ago, I really enjoyed seeing it myself. I got a call from HubSpot. They want to check on an account that, well, I think we were in touch with them like 6 months ago. And we've sent them an email to get back in touch. And what we saw is using the signals object that we sent an email, they didn't reply to the email, but 2 days later, they joined the event. And that's nice to see. Okay, because of sending the email, we didn't get a reply on it, yet they engaged with us again. And that email definitely was a trigger, to be top of mind with them and again. So getting those insights on what's happening at an account, being able to report on, it's huge. I think it's not for like beginners, but if you're a bit more advanced, this is great, and I can show you like how to start mapping it if you want.
Yeah, let's do that.
So you want to start with what type of touch points you want to report on. Maybe it's just content like form submissions, whatever. Um, Variations of contact requests. It's maybe a demo, contact, or audit, advice, events, deals. And this is a bit of a strange one. You already have deal objects, but what I did with signals is I also made a signal on when did they get their first deal, and when was the first deal closed, which makes it easier to report on just companies with such a touch point, and you can see the journey in the touch points or the signal section. And like we talked about, also like third-party signals, like people switching jobs, people getting funding, whatever. That could also be like a type of touch point. From there, you can think, okay, which exact sales signals do we want to cover, and what is the source for that signal? Is it the HubSpot form? Is the LinkedIn lead gen form? Is the CTA button? Is the list or workflow? Is it an object that was created or a combination of them? So I will show one example of that soon. But also consider, do you have forms in multiple languages? So you have maybe a white paper, but you have it in Dutch, in English, in French. That might be also be different forms to have a sense of, okay, what do we want to create and how do we want to feed that data?
Yeah. And I think that's, yeah, when you're talking about the deal and just the nuance, like these levels that we're talking about here, like there's nothing that's new, I think, in terms of like things you would love to be able to keep track of. But how are we doing it in a way that's not too cumbersome, can be automated, teams can work together to maintain, is why like when you start to organize it in this way that we're talking about, that becomes much more possible. Because usually, we're reliant on like contact source or lead source, and then maybe we make a deal source like custom field as well, and it's like single text and like what kind of data, or it's drop down and it can only be these things. So it might be an event, but we're not saying anything else about the event, or we create these ridiculous drop downs that have like every trade show we've ever gone to, and somebody's got to add the new one in every time, right? There's a better way to
Yeah,
do that stuff.
yeah, definitely. And I haven't made it yet. It's on my list to create custom coded workflows to automatically associate newly created deals with sales signals that were created like the last 90 days, because it doesn't have to be like one trigger, but it gives an overview of, okay, there's now um, the first deal, it's created, what happened. Maybe they visited an event, maybe they requested an audit, maybe um, um, they downloaded something. So it could be multiple things that led to this deal. And like I said, I don't think it's, well, you could use it some way for attribution, like maybe divide it on the amount of associated touch points, and well, split that on deal values. You could see, okay, what's the impact? Some that could be an attribution model, but just having a sense of, okay, if we look at all our new deals, then well, our events are coming back a lot, um, or not, and that could be an insight to well, to work on.
For sure. For sure.
There is a limit, however, to the amount of custom objects. So that's something to consider. Don't make it for like every email, or maybe make it that you delete it after a year or so. Because do you know the limit? Is it 10,000 or 1 million?
For records,
Yeah,
it's 1 million, uh, I think, in most cases.
yeah,
um,
okay,
there's actually a place in the portal that I'll look to confirm as you're going through this.
yeah,
They've got some data quality dashboard stuff that tell us now. So I'll
okay.
confirm
But
that.
yeah, creating a custom object is not that hard. Go to your settings, custom objects. You can only make it if you have enterprise license. Create a name, whatever. Um, you can create properties based on that custom object. You can even create pipelines, like with your deals. And I think this is interesting for events, because if you have an event with a, well, event pipeline, then you can see if they, well, the status of did we want them to be registered? Have they registered? Did they cancel? Did they attend or not? So that gives an insight in the like success of an event on this touch point. You also set
Yes.
up the associations. So touch point association to the company, to the contact, to deal, maybe to other objects that you have. So we already had this custom object for just for the events, event registrations. So I also add that association. Yeah, then you can just make a lot of properties. This is an overview of properties that I made for the custom object. Like there's normally, let me go here to the second page. You know, there's record source detail 1, 2, 3, but for a custom object, then this source detail is which workflow made the record. But we are used to the drill down 1 and 2 on contacts and companies, and we can sync that latest source to this object. So we know what was the source type when this action happened. And I've made, people just pause it later to see the kind of properties that we made and are important. You can choose to sync properties, have a drop down for it. Yeah. Number of
Yeah, I
associated
remember.
is interesting because this helps to trigger workflows, which can, how do you say it? Um, re-enroll. If the number of associations goes up, then trigger the workflow.
Yeah, and I think this is like, so I'm reminded of when I first started using HubSpot back in 2017. One of the first things I had to do to try and get like offline data into the system via spreadsheets or whatever, like having to create fields of understanding what offline source was or import source or these other source properties that we'd have to create. So it's nice to be able to lean on some of the native stuff sometimes, but that's where really considering like when to lean on the native versus create, other new properties. And to your earlier point of having these limits, and so I've confirmed that you have a maximum across all of your custom objects that is 1.5 million.
Hmm.
Um, so we're describing two ways to get to that limit. It's either this other limit, which is 10 total custom objects in most accounts, and you can buy more if needed. Um, but also, if you have lots of pipelines and start to treat them all like sub objects, is another one that you can get to. But I'm a big fan of kind of thinking of pipelines in a sub object, kind of way, and it's very undervalued right now in terms of like the pipelines of custom objects. I think are one of the most valuable reasons to decide to use a custom object. And when you think about deals and tickets, why they are powerful is it activate like the staging gate structure of a pipeline activates so much of the rest of HubSpot, when you execute that well.
Yeah, like here's an example that if you have a specific event, then you can see you have this like Kanban overview of a pipeline, which is really nice, and see okay, what's the status, and if it's an offline event, you can just look them up and swipe them to attend it. And having such a pipeline overview also allows you to create tags or show other data that is relevant. So if they are, if that company has an open deal stage, then you want to show it because that's the ones at your offline event that you really want to talk to move that deal forward. Having it face to the name is nice, and then knowing okay, this is important, or knowing who is who is really nice to check on the door. So yeah, that's the property side. And to make sense of it, well, you need a workflow for every touch point signal that you create. And here's just one example of, bridging the gap between different data sources, making one um, object of it. And this example here is like a demo. And of course, a demo could be your form submission, but you also see that sales gets in touch with a prospect. They filled in the contact form, and from there they say, well, let's schedule a demo. But then that demo was never a form submission. And if you check on activities that contain demo in the meeting name or meeting type, then that's also a demo that you want to register.
Yes, that is a. Oh man, you just uh, reminded me of why this is so important, right?
Yeah.
So many people focus on attribution and like customer journey touch points and like getting the data in the system, like trying to understand it. And my challenge is all to them is always like, how much of that matters if you're missing complete data sets like the one you just described? Like they didn't fill out the form because the salesperson didn't wait for them to fill out the form. He was able to create the demo request. That's a conversion point that we are often not bringing in to the system. And we know that that stuff is happening. It's happening on LinkedIn, it's happening on phone calls, it's happening at events. And if we know that that stuff is happening and we're not bringing that data in, how valuable, like what kind of insights can we actually get from the rest of the data that we're using when we know it's an incomplete data set, right? Like that is a
Yeah.
large hurdle for a lot of companies. And yes, it can be hard, right? That's why we're here talking about it can also be very easy if the strategy is there up front. If you build some infrastructure to support it, now you're working with like visibility in ways that you've always dreamed was possible, and it actually is possible right now. But deciding that you want to do it first, is the most important part.
Yeah, because this data is living in your portal. It's a meeting, yet you don't really see it on um, or if you check the whole picture. Well, you can see it on the activity overview, but like I said in the beginning, nobody really scrolls to all the activities, from my experience. And
Right. And
well,
that's why
yeah,
like
you can,
maybe,
yeah,
maybe the process, and this is where we get hung up on what data we need in our system versus what a great user experience is and what a great sales process looks like, right? Like it's super annoying for me when I'm in touch with the person that can help me and then they say I got to go fill out a form because I know that the only reason I have to do that is because they need data to come in and fire off workflows, whatever, when that salesperson could just schedule it right there with me. And now there's no more work to do, right? Which the best salespeople will do that,
yeah,
knowing that, okay, maybe this data gets lost in the mix, but it doesn't have to get lost, right? That's what we're saying here.
yeah. Especially with the new update lately, that with the Google Calendar, you can from your Google Calendar immediately say like what's the type of meeting, and that really helps because I also had a huge problem with this. I have to be honest. I also use this for meeting description, checking checking if it contained demo. Um, like we say good morning in Dutch, we say goedemorgen, which also contains demo. So every meeting description that contained goedemorgen, good morning, showed up, and meetings, yeah, it's not like companies or contacts in the overview. It's you really have to go to a contact, check the meeting, then checking the data. It's you don't have that easy overview of all the meetings. I know the update is coming, but yeah, this really helps to capture all the data and to save at this moment the variations of, okay, this was created by the form or like from the meeting. What meeting type is it? It's a demo or audit, um, some sources, whatever. And that really helps to, well, for like a demo. And for events, if you host multiple events, the naming convention here isn't that well, but form type hidden. You could have hidden fields on your form that you change based on the event. So it automatically changes the kind of, yeah, object based on that hidden property. So you have like a scalable system. Every new event or new addition of an event, you don't have to create a new touch point for it. You just change the property in the hidden property in the form, and you have this scalable system. Yeah,
It's
that's some
beautiful.
ins and outs. Yeah, so what can you see? Yeah, you can see that, first deal created, we saw this opportunity. Then they had an audit, they visited the HubSpot User Day, got an email, whatever. It's really nice to see that like journey happening at an account. From an overview, it's nice to see all those touch points together and the different types of touch points, when it happened, which contacts at which companies. You see it in the name as well, this data. Uh, on If you click on the record of the touch point and the signal, you can see what's the date. I didn't use the object create date because if you have a different property, it's also possible to create historic data. Or for example, if you would export import form submission dates, then you can change it. You can have a touchpoint date before you made the actual this touchpoint or custom object. You can see the source. You can if it's an event, you could also have event information here. So that's a nice way to display data on the touchpoint record overview. But also, yeah, well, filter. So just show the information on specific event, whatever. You can have it in the Kanban overview, or you just have the list view. I like the list view more because it can show more data
Yeah, me too. Uh, and I'll
like
note
this.
like the dates that you mentioned, like especially now with the update that you can show the relative time, like since that date or before that date. Like
Mm,
so much of this value is like we think just because they filled out a form or downloaded a thing or watched a webinar, like, oh, they're going to know, so I'm going to use that as context as I reach out. But if that was like 6 months ago, there's no way that they remember that. Like, and understanding time and relative to when these signals are happening can be a very powerful thing to say, like, okay, we know this very valuable piece of content, like, usually leads to better conversion. Like, this person said they looked at it, but it was 6 months ago. So instead of seeing that they already saw it and not doing it, understanding, okay, it was a long time ago. Maybe they meant to reach out, but they didn't. So I'm going to serve it again. And right, starting to use these insights, like you say, um, to really, put the team that we're asking to do this work in a much better position to, have successful calls and successful interactions.
yeah, you have a historic sense of the engagement with the other company. Yeah. And also on a high level, you're able to report on if you have all the touch points, see, make a division on, okay, what kind of touch points. Yeah, we showed in the beginning a lot of properties, and you can really go crazy with this. And this is really simplified and high over. You can show all the touch points over time, just show the specific events or specific content, whatever. You can make report on your event, specific event edition, which companies visited with a breakdown on deal stage, see the life cycle stages division, analyze the source of touch points. So having this data on a custom object with all the properties and not on a contact or company, really, well, this is like heaven for reporting.
Yes. And really, like, if you don't understand the nuance of this data set, and I mean, we see it all the time. People jump right to attribution, and it just never works. Like, it never works the way you want it to, because you're not truly understanding the data. You're doing it to kind of prove credit across the organization, so it creates all of this extra friction. When if you start from this place of let's understand, the data first, like what this stuff actually means, and when you can just sit down together, when it's being captured like this in a very you know objective way, let's say, the more objective we can make it, obviously the better. It becomes less of marketing versus sales. Let's think about this together. And on the marketing side, we see a lot of this touch point happening, but then we're not seeing it connected to closed one. Is that because it's not being mentioned, or is it because sales isn't, like, kind of, when the person says it on the call, are we not connecting it at that point? There's lots of reasons why we get misaligned. um, and just again, we come back to understanding the data set and really your process, right? We were talking before we went live about how important it is to map the process. And the process exists, right? Whether it's documented or not is the question, because we know that, let's say, salesperson, they go to events every year, right? They know how to talk to people at those events. They know how to get meetings after those events. Like, how much of that process is documented? And if it was documented, would you be able to know exactly how to use an object like this to capture what is happening, right? Instead of just, hey, here's a leads list, get after it, sales, which is what usually happens when it relates to events.
Yeah,
So this is
but
a really
this that
powerful.
this really helps to have a sense of what you have a go-to-market machine, and how do you feed it, and what's the result of what you feed to it. But for me personally, I really like to have this account overview on what has happened. It's so basic yet kind of missing, I think, because in B2B you have a decision-making unit, multiple people. There are, you know, multiple flying parts all around what's happening, and having a sense of that is so valuable to reach out in the right way, or knowing what's working or not. And for this go-to-market machine, and especially visualizing what is happening, I think that's a crucial part for bridging the gap between teams, bridging the gap between operational and management, because not everybody is able to understand like workflows, but you need to decide as a team, as a business, what's the process like, how is it really like, and how do you want to have it. Visualizing that is a must have. And then
Yes. And if
later on, yeah, you could see, well, maybe have this deal association which I want to make, and that's really nice. And maybe you could divide it, like if you have five touch points associated to a first create a deal, then divide it by five, have the value. You could do some plays with it, but knowing what happened before a deal, what kind of patterns do we see, is already crucial. And I sometimes compare this with, you want to travel from A to B, and you can use Google Maps. It's fantastic. You have a map of how you're going. You know the estimated time of arrival. If there's too much traffic, you have an alternative route, and it's really advanced to come from A to B. But there's also something much simpler like a compass. Being directionally correct and moving into that direction is much more valuable than going to the wrong direction or just looking around, thinking, oh, what should we do? And then there's also something in between, like you have Google Maps, you have a compass, maybe there's maybe you have the map. It's a physical map, traditional old paper, but it works. It gives you a sense of, okay, where am I? Where do you want to go? How do I get there? And maybe you don't need the really advanced um, estimated time of arrival, alternative ways to get there. Yeah, add complexity when complexity is needed. Keep it
Yeah,
simple to begin with.
yeah. No, and staying with that analogy, like sometimes we're asking people, like, what did you see when you took this journey? Like, where should I stop? Like, what should I avoid? Like, and those are signals in that case to take a different route, right? So that's a lot of I love that analogy. And I think this is great, man. I appreciate you, breaking this down. Um, it can be like the goal is visibility, right? Visibility on what is happening, so that we can derive insights from what is happening, and we can invest more or we can invest less, in terms of human capital, systems and technology, maybe AI now, definitely, right? If you don't have this kind of visibility, you're definitely flying blind in a lot of cases, and it's becoming harder and harder to be successful while flying blind. Um, and that's ultimately when you have already invested in tools like HubSpot and you have custom objects sitting in front of you and you're not using them, right? There's literally no further investment aside from like the process and the build out, right? That your team can definitely do. Like that was a very it's very simple to follow, and custom objects are very easy to implement. But again, if mapping that process first, super important. If there's one takeaway, when people are thinking about signals or touch points and how can they make this data set better, for their teams, what is the takeaway for you?
Mm, Focus on must have. And because you can go crazy with the custom object, um like we've been talking about like attribution, or the original source, syncing it, but maybe you just don't need all that. Maybe just the name of the custom object and having the custom object associated to the contact in a company, maybe that's enough. So yeah, keep it as simple as possible in the beginning, and only expand on what you really need, um, and focus on the must have.
Yes. No, that's well said. Like prove the process, build some more, prove the process, build some more, and you will get to the scalability that everybody promises. But if you start out with an object with 100 properties on it and then nobody knows what's valuable, like you
No,
get in trouble.
don't do that. Yes, do it as a pilot. Start it, launch it, learn it. Um, yeah, that's the way
Yeah,
forward.
no, that's well said. um So, as you're thinking about your process, as uh, you are thinking about your teams involved in the process, the data that they're sharing out loud and maybe not in the CRM, start to, find those opportunities for where you could be capturing data, and let's grow. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Mathias. Have a great day, everybody. Awesome.